System Shock was originally released way back in 1994. It was developed by Nightdive Studios as a sci-fi follow-up to their Ultima Underworld titles, and to say it was influential is an understatement. Its then unparalleled freedom let players solve its challenges as they saw fit, and it's credited, along with the Underworld games, for defining the immersive sim genre, directly inspiring famous imsim titles such as Deus Ex, Dishonored, Prey, and most notably BioShock, which was designed as its spiritual successor. While System Shock and its equally, if not more influential sequel, System Shock 2, were seen as important landmark titles by developers and gamers alike, they were not big sellers, placing them firmly in the realm of cult classic, and over the years, with their gameplay and visuals aging more and more, fell into some obscurity. That was until Nightdive Studios stepped in. In 2015, after successfully updating and re-releasing both System Shock 1 and 2 for modern operating systems, Nightdive would announce they were developing a full remake of System Shock within Unity. A Kickstarter campaign would follow in 2016. And that began quite the development journey. System Shock Remake's development was plagued with delays, setbacks, and disagreements over its direction, with internal conflict whether it should be a remaster, a faithful remake, or a full reboot. And a mid-development engine switch from Unity to Unreal only slowed things further. System Shock fans, especially those that had contributed to the Kickstarter, were not happy with the long development, and you can't blame them for being skeptical when Nightdive claimed the game would finally be releasing in 2023. 7 years after the launch of the Kickstarter. But in 2023, Nightdive Studios, with Prime Matter Publishing, finally got System Shock past the finish line and onto our systems. In today's video, I'll be going over and lending my thoughts on this long gestating remake, and whether or not it's worth your time. So let's grab a pipe, plug some stuff into our gloves, and go say hi to Shodan.
We're in a comms blackout since Shodan is unresponsive, and worse yet, the mining laser is charging for a potential strike on Earth.
Among all of its influential qualities, in my opinion, the real star of System Shock is its narrative. On top of being a trailblazer for indirect storytelling, it's a horrific cautionary tale of the dangers of unchecked greed and technological advancement. System Shock is set in the not-too-distant future of 2072. You play as a nameless hacker who is arrested by the powerful Tri-Optimum Corporation after attempting to steal a military neural implant off their servers. The hacker is brought to Citadel Station, orbiting Saturn, where he meets Tri-Optimum executive Edward Diego, who has an interesting proposition. If the hacker breaks into the station's systems and removes the ethical constraints of its AI Shodan, he'll not only drop the hacker's charges, but also outfit him with the military implant he tried to steal. The hacker is happy to comply, and after undergoing the surgery to install the implant, is put into a 6-month healing coma. When the hacker finally awakens, he finds a nightmare awaiting him. After her ethical constraints were removed, Shodan became self-aware and went rogue, killing everyone on the station and turning the survivors into her cybernetic minions. Oh boy, the hacker has caused quite the mess, and he is the only one who can clean it up. Since everyone on the station is dead and the hacker's only support are millions of miles away on Earth, 878.26 million to be precise, that's right, I looked it up, it's up to the player to piece together exactly what happened, done by collecting the audio logs of the dead crew members and listening to their accounts of Citadel's fall.
Jimmy, hope this message reaches you. Things are not looking good.
True, today this is an overused storytelling device that many roll their eyes at, but when Looking Glass first implemented it, it was nothing short of genius. Its intention was to keep players always immersed within the game world, never to be taken out of it with separate screens full of text or cutscenes, although cutscenes would be featured at the beginning and ends of the game. It made storytelling passive so they could always stay engaged. Their own personal experiences is what drove the story. Everything they learned in the audio logs served as context and motivation. Not only did this effectively immerse players, but if they listened to every audio log on Citadel, they would have a clear understanding of all the horrific events that transpired and who played a part in them. And believe me, it is quite the tale of hubris and tragedy, and almost 30 years after the original's release, still holds up beautifully.
Who are you? The computer nodes can be repaired, but you... Who are you?
Of course, what really makes the story memorable is the villainous Shodan, who not only terrifies the player throughout, but uses the station against them, trapping them in rooms, turning off energy bridges under their feet, and throwing ambushes at them. It drives home that Shodan didn't just take over Citadel, she is Citadel. You are the parasite within her body, and it doesn't take long for the player to realize that nowhere is safe.
If that insect gets a single digit of the system authorization code,
then I will see to your reprimanding personally.
Everything about the original's narrative, all of its qualities, have been perfectly preserved in the remake. You could say Nightdive took a if it ain't broke, don't fix it approach, which was wise. Looking Glass's storytelling methods and script worked back then, and they still work today. That being said, Nightdive has made some welcome additions and adjustments. The audio log scripts have been tweaked here and there, and new ones have been added. There's also a new intro sequence where you get to explore the hacker's apartment and take part in the fateful hack.
Turn around! Now!
In my opinion, this remains one of the best sci-fi horror narratives in gaming. One of the best narratives in gaming, period. And what is probably my favorite thing about this whole remake is that a whole new wave of players are going to be able to experience it.
See you.
The prisoner from New Atlanta, Sector 11. What's our destination?
Diego's office.
Easily the most spectacular aspect of this remake is Nightdive's reimagining of Citadel Station, staying true to the original art direction but also building upon it. Due to the limitations of Looking Glass's early 3D engine, the original Citadel Station was made up of simple, flat, cube-like geometry, with the 2D sprite textures doing the heavy lifting of expressing detail, inferring more complication and depth. It was effective for the time, but obviously has aged quite a bit. For the remake, Nightdive stuck close to this blocky aesthetic, but if you ask me, it appears they've motivated it to account for how Citadel Station might have been constructed. Everything appears to be made up of modular cubes that I imagine could be easily assembled in space and repaired, like space Legos. And it looks really cool. Now that's my personal read, I can't say for sure that's what Nightdive was going for, but either way, everything feels like it has more practicality and intention, making Citadel feel more believable. And detail that was once inferred by textures is now tangible, with walls full of mechanisms, twisting pipes, and hanging wires. To go along with that, many of the new visual elements are just things to make this place feel like an actual human habitat. Bathroom pods can now be found throughout each floor, along with vending machines for food and drink, as well as more plant life. One of my favorite additions are the large windows, finally allowing players to get a good look at the exterior of the station, lending a sense for how big it is, but where they are in relation to everything. Better yet, they now let players witness events that could only be implied in the original through radio transmissions. When I first saw this game in action, I was taken aback by how shiny, sleek, and modern it looked. When I took a closer look though, I was shocked to see that the textures were pixelated in a retro style, not unlike the original, as if Nightdive was saying, yeah, this is new, but it's built on the DNA of the old. I was a little unsure of this style at first, as some of these textures look pretty rough up close, but through the course of the game, I came to love it. I think it's awesome it all adds up to this beautiful contemporary composition, a true example of some of its parts. If Nightdive continues to make more remakes like this, I would love to see them develop this style further. I feel like it could be their signature. Particle effects also deserve high praise. Sparks and smoke look amazing and are also made up of pixels just like the textures. And explosions look phenomenal, very realistic. The effect of the spark gun can be a little much though. It looks great, but when multiple enemies fired at me, it was pretty disorienting and just plain hurt my eyes. I'd be happy if this was toned down in the future. Lighting, however, is the frosting that completes this gorgeous cake. The original System Shock's lighting effectively created a creepy atmosphere, and the remake takes that and shoots it to the stratosphere. Every corridor of this game is a feast of contrast. Light seemed to struggle to bring brightness to these oppressive halls, giving you a never-ending sense of tension. Colored reflections glitter and flutter throughout, particularly on your weapons, and the realistic strobe of dynamic lights brings further tangibility. Sometimes the bloom of the lights can get in the way of the puzzles, but otherwise it's absolutely incredible. One of my favorite aspects are the animations for your character. Every new weapon, item acquisition, or recharge comes with an elaborate animation that is bouncy, snappy, and smooth. Not all that dissimilar from animations you'd see in shooters like Call of Duty and Battlefield. They're satisfying to watch, definitely give a greater feeling of immersion, and gives everything a playful energy. This smooth animation work also extends to the enemies, whose redesigns stay true to the originals but brings a more horrific body horror aesthetic. Where in the original they were creepy sprites with a handful of animations, now they feel like living, breathing, bleeding monsters. A nitpick I do have is that enemies ragdoll pretty hard and rubbery upon death, which can look pretty goofy, especially for the cyborgs. Another thing that bugged me is that all the dead bodies look the same. They're this stock, bald, shriveled up dead guy or gal. Something that was cool and immersive about the original was whenever you found an audio log, it wasn't too far away from the dead body that left it, giving you the sense that this was an actual living person at one point. And I wish Nightdive took this immersive quality further by making these corpses look more recognizable to their audio log portraits. Touching on audio last, I have few complaints. All audio logs have been re-recorded with new voice actors, and their performances are vastly improved over the originals, which have become less and less convincing over the years.
And we've got power fluctuations, and robot crews are redecorating Alpha Quad. Where's the reboot switch?
Heading to Alpha to throw the breaker, again. That's if I can find the damn switch with all those robots remodeling the quadrant. When will we reconnect the system to Shodan again?
Terry Brosius returns to voice Shodan and has hardly missed a beat. Her performance is just as disturbing and maniacal as it was back in 1994.
Most of the insects have either died or were reborn.
Small resistance
Pockets
remain.
I will cleanse them from my body soon.
Sound design is excellent and brings an atmosphere that feels more in line with System Shock's successors. Citadel Station has a humming ambiance, hinting at its life support systems and internal machinery keeping things running. And no matter how many games I play, walking down a silent hallway and hearing a creepy voice come out of nowhere will always get my heart beating.
Scanning.
Ah, geez, where are you? The remake's more tonal soundtrack also weaves into and enhances the atmosphere, not all that different from the way music and ambiance was handled in Looking Glass's Thief games, and a cool touch are the brief flourishes of the original's synth soundtrack. In all, System Shock's presentation from top to bottom demonstrates Nightdive's talented artistry. I'm not sure what's more impressive, the fact that they've preserved the personality of the original's visuals, or that they've made them feel real. System Shock's gameplay boils down to exploring, fighting, and puzzle solving. Citadel Station is basically one giant navigational brain teaser. Each of its circular, non-linear floors presents the player with an urgent problem they must solve. Like, oh no, Shodan is about to destroy Earth with a laser. We need to shut it down. Or Shodan is cooking up a bioweapon that must be eliminated. There are particular steps and hurdles to overcoming these problems, but the player has some freedom to go about them as they want with the cybernetic tools they discover throughout. For instance, there might be an energy bridge that's turned off. The player can go through the trouble of turning it back on, or just use the jetpack turbo boots to bypass it. And at various points throughout, they'll have to fix junction boxes to access new areas. Sure, they can take the time to solve these tricky puzzles, or just use a logic probe they found lying around and solve it instantly. Now, System Shock was an early immersive sim, so for new players coming into it, don't expect the same level of systemic depth and player agency you'd find in, say, Deus Ex or Prey, but creativity and experimentation is guaranteed to reveal some alternate solutions and, yes, some emergent gameplay. For the remake, Nightdive has stayed very faithful to the level design and mechanics of the original, right down to the gravlift puzzles. Whee! In terms of level design, there are certain sections that have been streamlined and others that have been completely redesigned, with some new rooms and crawl spaces sprinkled throughout, even a new puzzle or two. Veterans of the original, however, will find a lot of this very familiar, and that's a good thing. In terms of mechanics, all of the cybernetic abilities return as well as support items and weapons, with some quality of life tweaks here and there to make them a little easier and more practical to use, resulting in a smoother play all around. One thing to keep in mind about System Shock is that it hates you and wants you dead. Or at least that's how it feels. Death is around every corner in Citadel, whether it be mobs of mutants and cyborgs, explosive RC cars that are a real pain, or the random room full of deadly radiation or biocontamination. You will die many, many times in this game, but part of the fun of System Shock is building up your hacker. You may start off helpless and weak, but go through the game and collect enough weapons, support items, and cybernetic abilities, and by the end, you're gonna be a powerhouse, which is a satisfying payoff for all your struggles. All that being said, death is really just a slap on the wrist here. If the player tracks down and deactivates the cybernetic conversion stations, they'll be resurrected at them upon kicking the bucket. Their only penalty being they'll have to backtrack to where they died. All progress remains. For those familiar with BioShock, this is basically the same system as the Vita Chambers. A common complaint for imsims that have this system is that it takes the consequence out of death. And yeah, it does. The reason Looking Glass had this in the first place was so death didn't discourage players too much from the trial and error of it. They wanted players to experiment and find their own solutions, and losing progress over and over could discourage that. Back in 1994, this was good to have. Today, I don't mind having it, but I don't think it's really necessary anymore. Especially since this game has both manual and quick saves, which completely undermine it. I really do wish Nightdive found a way to give this system a little more consequence, or found an alternative. It's a fault with them sticking so close to the original. Many longtime fans are going to be pleased Nightdive stayed so faithful to the original game's systems. And while they are still fun, I am a little disappointed Nightdive didn't try to push them further, to be more in line with System Shock 2 and other immersive sims. An example I can point to are the security cameras. Just like in the original, cameras need to be destroyed to lower each floor's security level. This stops enemies from spawning and opens up locked areas. Beyond that though, they don't really do anything. They're just there to be destroyed. In System Shock 2, when cameras spotted a player, they would put the area on alert and send enemies at them, and players actually had the option to hack them and use them to their advantage. Other similar imsims would follow this design. There's nothing wrong with the first game's camera system, but I feel like the remake could have benefited from updating them to be more in line with System Shock 2's, and still have them serve the same gameplay function. I felt the same for other systems throughout my playthrough. For those that might disagree with me, I'm not saying the game is worse for this. It's more my personal preference. I like when remakes iterate on and remix the originals, the Resident Evil remakes being prime examples. For me, it would have made the experience more enjoyable. Now, during the remake's development, Nightdive did have the intention of pushing the systems further, and you can see hints of it in the early trailers. But according to them, this resulted in feature creep and did contribute to development restarting. Clearly there was an effort and it just didn't pan out, and I respect that. But I'll always have the what ifs in the forefront of my mind every time I replay this. I have more to say relating to this, but let's put that aside for now and move on to the pew pew smack smack. Combat remains untouched in terms of its fundamentals, but its overall feel has been given a huge makeover. In the original, the idea was to make it feel like the player was in the body of somebody else, so moving had an immense sense of weight and momentum, with physics in place to give you a physical sense of presence, like bouncing off the wall if you ran into it. This was fantastic for immersion, but in retrospect made movement and combat slow, cumbersome, and at worst frustrating, and the overly complex control scheme didn't help. For the remake, the mechanics of moving and shooting have been updated to feel more in line with a contemporary first-person shooter, and it's a welcome improvement. It's tighter, faster, a hell of a lot more approachable, and shooting across the board has a satisfying sense of pop and oomph to it. Weight and momentum are still a factor, but hardly get in the way of playability. Melee is also hugely improved over the original and feels improved compared to the remake's demos. It's still tricky to get a sense of how close you need to be to an enemy to hit them, but swings connect realistically and enemies react believably. Well, the organic ones at least. Cybernetic enemies don't really react to melee damage, which feels a little awkward, and I'm still a little perplexed that we can't block. but the laser sword is still sick. Yeah, laser sword rocks. Grenades are a little finicky. Their throwing animation is just a hair too long, which gives them a laggy feel. I don't think it would hurt to speed up the animation to make it a little more responsive. The strength of the hacker's throw is a little hard to gauge as well, and the grenade physics might be a hair too realistic. Ah, come on. Now, while I do feel like combat is vastly improved over the original, at the end of the day, I feel like it's just okay. The enemies are not terribly exciting to fight. They will just stand still in the open and fire at you or charge, which, yes, they did in the original too, but they never really attempt to take cover or flank you, or make an effort to dodge your fire. They just stand there. The assassins and soldiers definitely have some of that spice to them, which was fun, but otherwise most enemies are big stationary damage sponges, and the flying types can be awkward to go up against, and look at too. Dude, are you flying in place? Now, in all fairness, I think the intention here was to stay close to the original feel, and have slower paced, survival-focused shooting. And I'd be a liar if I said it wasn't thrilling taking cover from enemy fire and then popping out for a kill shot. But overall, while it's mechanically sound, I just feel like combat is missing energy and tension, and at worst can feel a little stiff and clunky. The cyberspace sequences are another thing that have received a massive and appreciated makeover. Cyberspace is the hacking game of System Shock, presented as a 6 Degrees of Freedom-esque shoot-'em-up, where you battle your way through a vibrant techno maze, fighting off security programs and blowing up energy terminals to gain access to the locked portions of the station. In the original, the maze was made up of wire grids and polygonal enemies. It was a cool concept at the time, but in the decades since hasn't aged all that well. The wireframe levels are confusing to navigate, requiring large arrows strewn about to help you through it, and the controls are slow, awkward, and floaty. The remake sticks close to the original but speeds it up, makes it a lot more pretty and a lot more fun. The wireframes have been filled in with metallic and somewhat translucent walls, making levels far less confusing to navigate and giving them a rather fantastic cyber aesthetic. Enemies stick close to their original polygonal designs and now have more animations and crazier attack patterns. You also still have the same weapons and abilities, like a drill that can eat through literal iced enemies, along with a decoy of yourself to fool them. And I love that there's little stylistic references to the original. You'll notice fleeting glimpses of your objectives and other geometry through the walls, a callback to being able to see through the wireframes of the original. What was once a chore in the original is now something to look forward to in the remake. While System Shock Remake stays very faithful to the gameplay systems of the original, it does introduce some new ones that are nice additions, but come with some head-scratching flaws. To start, let's talk about the money. Coins can now be collected on Citadel that can be spent at vending machines for healing snacks and dermal patches, as well as security lockers for ammunition and, most importantly, weapon modification stations. Oh yes, weapons can now be modified to improve their stats, like damage, ammo capacity, and reload speed. And since they are placed somewhat randomly throughout, it's further incentive to thoroughly explore the station. Now, you can spend lots of time hunting down coins, but the fastest way to earn them is through recycling, the next big addition. Recycle stations can now be found on every floor of Citadel, where you can convert the junk in your inventory to valuable coins. Most random items have a credits value to them, and if you happen to have junk that has no credit value, like empty candy bar wrappers, you can vaporize them to scrap and exchange the scrap for coin. 10 pieces of scrap equals 1 coin. So stealing all the doodads out of a room or collecting all the garbage on Citadel is worth your time. Something to keep in mind, though, is that recycling will always yield more coins than scrapping. So let's say an item is worth 5 coins. If you were to vaporize it to scrap and exchange that instead, you'll only get 2 coins back. I love that Nightdive added this, but there are limitations to it that make sense and don't. One thing that struck me is that only broken weapons, found on dead enemies, can be scrapped, and not working weapons. This was odd to me, as there's a lot of duplicate weapons on Citadel that are pretty much useless, and you'd think they'd be the #1 reason to have a recycler in the first place. But then I realized that if a player can recycle working weapons, then there's probably nothing stopping them from recycling all the working weapons and potentially putting themselves in an unwinnable state. Okay, I get that. Could there have been a way around this? I think there could have been, but at the end of the day, it's not a huge deal, especially since there are so many avenues for recycling. What doesn't make sense to me though is the size limitation. You can only fit so many items in the recycler. Why can't I just recycle everything in my inventory as one big batch, get all my coins, and move on? Why do I have to take the time to fit everything in this square one batch at a time? I'm ultimately going to scrap everything I want scrapped. Why make it a slower process for me? But the bigger pain is that there are larger items in this game, with credit values, that are impossible to recycle because they simply won't fit in the recycler. For example, broken assault rifles won't fit in it. You have to vaporize them. And to remind, vaporizing to scrap always yields less coins. Why put a credit value on these items to begin with if it's impossible to earn it? And no, I never found a larger recycler on Citadel. Believe me, I looked. The other big system added is the cargo lift. The cargo lift is where you can store items to free up space in your inventory, and it can go to every floor of Citadel, which is super convenient. It's pretty much like Resident Evil's magic item box, but without the magic. I'm happy this is here, but my hang-up with the cargo lift is the same as the recycler. You can only store a small amount of items in it. Eventually, I maxed it out and was forced to leave my extra items on the grounds of various areas of Citadel, resulting in me backtracking whenever I had to swap certain stuff out, which happens often when weapons take up so much space, and when the game has a system that converts random junk to money. Inventory hoops are inevitable here. Why have it limited? Why can't I just keep my extra stuff in one spot? This just makes things messy and forces me to backtrack more. Look, I know a key challenge of this game is inventory management and the tough choices that come from it. But you know what? That's still here in spite of the cargo lift. This didn't need to add to that challenge. This should have been more of a help to players. Yep, this is System Shock. Nightdive has successfully taken the 1994 classic and brought it to the standards of modern gaming. It's vastly more playable, its excellent and chilling story has been recreated damn near flawlessly, and the visual upgrade is extraordinary. I do have my disappointments with it. Combat is a bit of a letdown, and I wish Nightdive pushed the original systems further, and the new ones leave something to be desired. But whether you share my opinions or not, I think most of us can agree this is a treat for System Shock fans. And the best part is that a whole new wave of gamers are going to be able to experience it. I would absolutely recommend this to System Shock fans. I'm sure most of them are already playing it, as well as newcomers. I would also strongly encourage fans of the BioShock series and other immersive sims to check this out and experience the origins. But that's it for me. What are your thoughts on System Shock Remake? Be sure to let me know down in the comments. If you dug the video, please be sure to subscribe, like, share, and smack that bell. If you want to come say hi, my Discord is linked below, along with my affiliate links. I'm Kirk, and thank you for watching this video. Stay safe out there.